Have you ever been in the wrong place at the wrong time? Well, then this video is exactly what you're gonna need to up your game and never end up in situations like that again. Today, we're gonna go over positioning. It's a really important skill that can make or break team fights. Obviously, the best position is to be sitting right on top of that like button. That way, with notifications turned on, you guys don't miss any of our videos. Really though, what is a position? What do you think of when you hear the word positioning? Really, it boils down to your team comp and how it interacts with the enemy team comp. To put it in simple terms, if you've got a team of 5 divers, well, you better be diving. So how do you get to the point where you know exactly what it is that you need to do? Well, you first gotta understand what you need to do to win. Now, this changes drastically with your role, but that's okay. We're gonna go over a few factors that you can look at and consider to identify what it is that you, as an individual, need to do to fit into your team and destroy the enemy. First, your champion. What does your champion do? How does it interact with your opponent? Are you a CC machine? Do you do a ton of DPS? Maybe you make them explode in less than a second. What is it that you do? Are you playing that Veigar? Are you playing that Leona? Or are you playing that Ashe? Second, what does the enemy team want to do? How do they stop you from doing what you want to do? Is that what they need to do in order to win? And the third, it's kind of a combination of the past two, and it's what exactly does your team need to do in order to win the game? And how do you fulfill your role in that objective? With these 3 things in mind, you should be able to identify what your role in your team and against the enemy team is going to be like. You might have a mix of CC, damage, and tank ability, and that means that you're probably playing a bruiser, so you're just trying to be as much of a nuisance as possible for the enemy backline. If you've got a ton of burst up front, well, you're gonna try and catch out your enemy backline so that you can blow them up. Otherwise, if you're wasting it on tanks, it's not gonna be that effective until the very late game when you have that Void Staff. We're not gonna go over every possible role that you can have on a team, but ideally, you'd be able to identify where you should fit by thinking about those factors. Once you get that down, try and formulate a plan about how you're going to do it. And this feeds directly into our second point. You need to understand where you can fulfill your role in the best way possible. Before that, make sure that you check out our website, GameLeap.com. We have tons of challenger level content that goes way more in depth than what you can see here elsewhere on YouTube. If you're interested, make sure you check it out. I promise you that there is something there that will improve your gameplay. I'll also be posting exclusive guides on there, so if you enjoy this and want more, make sure you check it out. So, where exactly do you best fulfill your role? I split it up into 3 different ways. Generally, you're gonna fit into them. Maybe you could break it down a little bit further, but you'll find what you need to do through this. So the 3 places that we have are the front line, back line, and the endless void in between. Now you might be saying, Ace, what on earth are you talking about? And it's fine, we'll save the complicated one for last. First things first, backline. Everybody knows what the backline is. It's that one guy, maybe 2 guys on your team who just go absolutely crazy monster damage dealers. Specifically, if you're a damage dealer that has high DPS, you want to be hitting whatever is closest to you at all times as much as you possibly can. Why? Well, until you get things like crit, or perhaps scale really hard like a champion like Jhin, who has that really powerful 4th shot or just really powerful crits in general, you're not going to be able to hit the enemy backline in a meaningful way. And for that matter, you're not going to be able to do it for the champions who fit in the void in between either. With that being said, if you see the opportunity to kill one of the enemy damage dealers, you should take it. Don't be afraid to switch targets. You have a ton of DPS. Switching targets isn't a big deal for you. It's alright, you're not a mage who has long cooldowns. Put your damage out on whoever you can reach and whoever is the most important, in that order. That is the general rule of thumb that you want to follow as a DPS backline. Now, if you're a burst backline, usually you want to play carefully with your spells. You want to look for the squishies who exist in the void and the backline that you can blow up in one rotation. Now, it's key to remember that backliners are weak against frontliners until they scale so hard that the frontliners just can't deal with them. Especially if you're a burst backliner, you're gonna have real trouble burning through enemy tanks when they've got all their resists and health in your way. DPS champions don't have that hard of a time, but still, if they're left alone, there's a good chance that they might not win. So what does this mean? Well, think about that order that I gave you earlier. What you can reach, and then what's most important. If you going to hit an important target puts you in range of a tank who has CC off cooldown, that's a huge mistake. You're gonna get locked and killed almost instantly. They're just waiting for you to make that positioning error. With that backline breakdown out of the way, we're gonna be moving on. And this might come as a surprise, but we're covering that void that we spoke about first. So who goes in the void? Well, to put it simply, anything that's not a backline or a frontline. To give some examples, let's talk about champions. Where does Jax fit in? Where does any assassin fit in? Say Zed or Talon. They really don't do a ton of DPS, and yeah, they might do burst, but they don't really get the opportunity to stay safe like the other backliners do. So they don't fit there. Well, are they a frontliner? We haven't really gone over them, but the key points of a frontliner is being able to stay on the front. They can't really take too much damage because, well, they're building full damage, and they don't really have defensive abilities in their kit, other than, say, maybe a stealth or something like a Zed ultimate where you're untargetable for a little bit. So this is where that void that I mentioned comes into play. Let's say you're playing a support like Janna. Well, you're definitely not a frontliner, and you're definitely not a backliner, but you for sure want to stay safe, so it's kind of like a blending of a role with a little bit extra thrown in, and that's where that void is. You're not really sure of what you want to do, chances are you fit into that void, and this can be a champion who's super flexible, like Jax, or a champion who blends the two roles, like Galio. He does a ton of damage, but his playstyle is up in your face, and he wants to be on the front. So that's the void. It's kind of wide and doesn't really have a great definition, but it definitely still exists. The void might seem like the hardest role to play in, but at the end of the day, it's really not that bad, because it kind of has some aspects of the front line, which is the hardest to play, but really mostly focuses on the back line. If you're playing a champion like Galio, or say a champion like Fizz or Zed, you know, you're gonna be the ones kind of engaging the fights occasionally, but you're never permanently on the front line, right? Because you don't have what you need to stay there. Now, as if things weren't already strange enough, let's actually start covering the front line. The one that I've said is the hardest. You might be thinking, Ace, you know, it's the front line. They're just up there in their face, and they're there 24/7. What's so complicated about that? Well, let me ask you a question. Let's say you're playing Veigar mid. You get a champion from that void position we talked about earlier. Say an assassin. Zed, he's after you. How do you stop him? If your answer is use your E to position on you so that he can never shadow in, and if he ultis you, he just gets automatically stunned and killed, well then, good. You knew the technical answer, but what about the nuance? Can you do that every single time? What if you don't have vision on him? What if he's flanking you? What if your E's on cooldown? How do you solve this problem? The answer is that you don't get to do that. Your frontline has to solve the problem for you. If that Zed is coming after you as Veigar and you have a Maokai on him, do you think he can get on you? Absolutely not. He's gonna get rooted, bashed, rooted again, and if he's not already stunned by your wall again, then you put it in the wrong place, and that's on you. That's assuming that he's not already dead. So this is why the front line is the hardest to play. Why? Because they might seem like they are the simplest, but their decisions carry the most weight. If you put Doublelift and the 4 worst players in the world on a team, what do you think would happen? Chances are he's not going to be able to do a whole bunch if his team isn't there to enable him. And who are the enablers? The front line. Yeah, you might be thinking, oh, what about the supports that are in the void that we talked about? No, they're not the enablers. Usually, those champs are the buffers. There might be a little bit of overlap when you think about support and frontline. Without looking at the list though, can you name another one besides Leona? We're not going to name them all, but the point is that there aren't that many. Most of them fit into the void as champions who buff their allies, not necessarily ones who stay up front and who can engage fights whenever they pretty much want. What you're looking for in a frontline is that Ornn. It's that Maokai, that meat stick that just denies the enemy team all opportunities and locks them down. You still might be asking, why is frontline complicated? You're saying it yourself, they just have to stand in the way. Well, where they exactly stand in the way and who they use their abilities on matters a ton. If your frontline is extending too deep and you can't get in there and support him, he's just gonna get melted on his own. And that is gonna be the defeat for you and your team. Why? Because if you don't have a frontliner, what can you do? Can you walk in and face check for wards? Is your warding as effective? Are you able to teamfight without all that CC and health soak? The point is that even a tiny mistake from a frontliner can get them killed. If you overextend too far, you're gonna end up dying. If you use your ability on the wrong target, chances are your backline might die, or maybe one of your supports. If you're a little bit too scared, then you're gonna miss out on important opportunities. You gotta find that Goldilocks zone, that just right to play frontline properly. And this gets way more complicated with more factors. What about flankers? Is it better to try and peel the flankers, or is it better to buy time for your team by just diving in crazy? What's the answer? It's not necessarily something that you can look at and decide on a split-second decision. It's something that you need experience for. At the end of the day, if you're playing a frontliner and you're not there to actually do your job, your team's not going to be able to get much done safely. It's hard for them to ward without a tank in the way. It's hard for them to clear wards without a tank in the way, and it's hard for them to face check and team fight without a tank in the way. Regardless of whether you're playing a backline, frontline, or one of those void champions in between, you need to make sure that you're getting your job done. There's a ton of variables to consider, but at the end of the day, I believe that the frontline is the most complicated, and it's also a role that the other two depend upon heavily in order to succeed. Remember, if you can understand exactly what do you bring to your team, whether it be damage, CC, or tankiness, and you understand where you can do that the best, and execute on that, you'll be in great shape. Regardless of what role you play, top, mid, jungle, bottom support, and regardless of where your champion fits in, that backline, frontline, and void in between, you'll have a ton more success if you can identify them and play towards them. Don't forget to check out our website, GameLeap.com. We have tons of content there made by challenger level players. I'll also be posting guides that are only seen there, so if you're looking for even more in-depth content that you can see here on YouTube, make sure you check it out in the description below.